A city and a school district say yes to taxes, a turning point. The search for foreign capital, the governor and his passport. The probe of foreign interference, and Arkansan again standing with his president. And insanity cloaked in political rhetoric. Can we do something about it other than live with it or die because of it? Arkansas Week, next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. Summer's upon us, but so is the news. And we're going to begin tonight with a couple of local issues. Local, but they have statewide implications. Sarah Whites-Kodachek joins us from Arkansas Public Media. Jacob Kaufman, reporter for KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas. And Hal Bass from the political science staff at Ouachita Baptist University. Sarah, it was a big day, really, and a big election for the Pulaski County Special School District, and connected to that in a way is also a court ruling of some significance for this one of Arkansas's largest school districts.
So the voters of Pulaski County passed a millage to support some renovation and construction of new schools in heavily African American parts of the school district. The district is in a 35-year court-ordered desegregation case where it has to prove in various areas that it's met the requirements of the court. So a federal judge ruled this week that in the area of staffing, equity, and integration in staffing, the district has finally achieved its goals. In 2011, a federal judge really chastised the district and said it had done apparently nothing towards integrating, especially in staffing. So one area of success is with administration and the number of blacks the district's been able to bring into leadership roles that's more proportionate with the number of students in the district that are African American.
Well, in terms of its court state, it's not out of the woods, meaning out of the courts by any stretch of the imagination, but it's yet one more step toward a declaration of unitary status, assuming it, and we'll presume it will get there.
Yeah, some of the other areas are discipline and academic achievement, and then facilities, which the millage will help with reaching those facilities goals. Pulaski County is one of over 10 districts in the state that are still in these decades-old desegregation orders, and has not been able to work itself out in all these years. So it is making progress, and as you mentioned, a Pine Bluff millage also this week to launch a Go Forward Pine Bluff revitalization plan. Some controversy around that because it's a public-private partnership, and although the mayor is on the board of directors, it will be run by an entity that's not directly under control of the city council or the voters. But a new sign of investment in Pine Bluff, which obviously has been struggling for some time.
One more bit on the Pulaski County District, and I guess even by extension all of the districts. You mentioned that there were 10 or 11, all just shy of a dozen that are still involved in lengthy desegregation proceedings, but vis-a-vis the Pulaski County District, this is an entity, a political entity that has not always been hospitable to millage increases.
Well, just a few years ago, we saw the citizens vote down a millage increase. So this shows some renewed faith in what the Pulaski County Special School District's been able to accomplish, I think.
Pine Bluff again. No question that Arkansas needs a delta. What kind of delta does it need? How? And obviously it needs a Pine Bluff, largest city in the southeast corner of the state. How?
And again, the advances of the past week suggest, light going forward. A real question, though, is do community-specific initiatives have the capacity to really transform the entire region? Or is it going to take something more comprehensive, really run but from a regional or even a statewide basis, to turn around what has been a long-running deterioration throughout the region? And the Go Forward Pine Bluff folks are optimistic. It seems that this is a start. It's going to generate considerable revenue. It does show a revitalization of community commitment and community spirit. But I guess skeptics would say we need to see something more broadly based throughout the Delta to have the transformative effect that's required.
And the hope is that this money is not, it's $32 million, it's a 7-year sales tax increase, $32 million from taxpayers, $20 million from the Simmons First Foundation, backed by the Simmons Bank, which is, of course, one of the great hopes of any Delta town is that your primary industry will stick around. That's been the reason for a lot of the loss, and mills have closed all over the Delta, but Simmons Bank, the large employer in Pine Bluff, has stayed there despite becoming a pretty successful bank and growing. They've decided to keep a lot of roots there. But you know, it's yet to be determined, I guess, exactly where this money will go to. It's nice to get $50 million. Pine Bluff has problems like debris from vacant buildings literally crowding the roadways on Main Street, preventing traffic for some amount of months. And when I talked to Go Forward Pine Bluff Initiative people, they didn't bill a single big project as this money is going to revitalize this corner, generate this particular business. It's more of a maintaining existing city services, and we'll see what goes forward. But there's a column from Rex Nelson in the newspaper this week that said something about there are towns of critical mass in the Delta. They have a hospital, they have an industry, and they will remain as long as those things are viable, just as a certain amount of people.
As a university can be.
Yeah, a university, exactly. But if there's not an economic necessity for these towns to survive, what amount of taxpayer money, what can it really do? But
And we do have an interesting situation developing here with these two voter-inspired tax increases. We see a willingness, at least at this point in time, for voters to do what elected representatives appear unwilling to do, and that is raise taxes. And that poses the question, will this signal something to the elected representatives, or are we going to have to rely increasingly on essentially direct democracy as opposed to representative democracy to move the ball forward in terms of generating the revenues necessary to do the public services that are required?
Along those lines, but Pine Bluff specific, even the city's most ardent, enthusiastic backers readily acknowledge that the town for a half century has been racked by political division with obvious racial overtones to it. One mayor after another. I mean, what is there the suggestion here that maybe we may be moving toward consensus here, or Pine Bluff may be moving towards some semblance of consensus here?
I don't know. I don't know Pine Bluff politics well enough to speculate too much, but I'll speculate a little bit. The vote, there still is maybe 30%, 40% voted against this. I think it was largely sectioned in poor quarters of town, more African Americans. They were worried that it's a transfer of taxpayer money essentially out of the city council's direct control by funneling it through the goals of this Go Forward Pine Bluff initiative, which is backed by the Simmons Bank. So the criticism from opposing aldermen has been at least that we're giving taxpayer dollars to bankers and hoping that they'll redirect in a way that is equitable for the entire city as opposed to just a commercial district or something like that.
Yeah, still plenty of room for dispute and contention.
Right.
And as often the case, diagnosing the problem is easier than prescribing solutions. And prescribing solutions is easier than implementing those solutions. And that's where we are right now. It's easy to see that something needs to be done, but finding consensus on what needs to be done and then figuring out a way to do it.
And this is
formidable problems.
A 7-year tax, so I think that's they'll have to prove themselves where they're spending this money over 7 years. If they really want to build trust with the entire community, that's the way to do it.
Moving on. Governor Hutchinson announced this week that he and his AED, Arkansas Economic Development Commission director, will be heading abroad yet again. The quest is for overseas capital.
He'll be leaving on a Saturday. It's a week-long trip. It's something that has been a hallmark, sort of the governor's first campaign for governor, and something he's repeatedly done. He's traveled to Europe before, as well as China several times. His argument is that other states maybe don't necessarily make this effort to have a direct face and connection, showing these companies in Europe and Paris and England he'll be going to that otherwise might not know Arkansas or anyone in it, that the government there is going to be supportive in some direct manner of your industry if you'll come here. So he argues that it's a trade mission that has brought some results. We'll see what comes of this one.
He seems to be focusing on aeronautics and defense, so he's going to the Paris Air Show, and then he's going to Israel to court some military contracts, which is interesting that he's strategizing, building on the Dassault Falcon presence here and asking for more aeronautics presence.
It seems as if in the evolving job description of the Arkansas governor, international economic development is simply playing a much larger role than we used to understand to be the case here. And whoever is governor is going to find oneself involved in those sorts of trade missions. Now, skeptics, critics argue essentially that what we're talking about here is submitting to shakedowns here, that you're essentially volunteering to be a victim here and let the taxpayers pay the bill. But the proponents, and they are more numerous here, argue one, there's a multiplier effect for the entire state for getting the jobs here, and two, to meet the competition, we simply have to do it. We have to be proactive. We can't sit back and wait. And it's going to take.
Hal, you're talking about in terms of incentives that the state would offer overseas.
Yeah, that essentially we ask the taxpayers to subsidize the profits of the corporations, national or international here. But the proponents insist that if we don't offer these, we don't have a chance of landing any of the enterprises.
And of course, trade relationships around the world in the era of the Trump administration and Brexit and all sorts of other things becoming increasingly, I guess, at a more unknown point than they were. The governor's hoping to exploit some of that to make those connections while maybe the United States is moving away, while Europe is figuring out how they'll change their trade relations with England. He's hoping to take advantage of this kind of moment of trade doubt.
Well, as Hal noted, Mr. Hutchinson has vastly expanded the overseas portfolio of the chief executive of Arkansas. I believe, I should have checked this, but I believe it was only in his final year as governor that Mr. Hutchinson's predecessor, Mr. Beebe, made an overseas trade mission. I think I'm right on that. Despite pleadings by his AEDC director, please, let's go. You need to go. You're the CEO of Arkansas. You need to go overseas. You need to meet these people, shake their hands. And this, I believe, is Mr. Hutchinson's fifth or maybe sixth overseas trade mission.
I think the first time Hutchinson...
Governors, for political appearance's sake, have been quite reluctant to do that.
I was going to say, I think the first time Hutchinson went on a trip, there's a lot of jokes, kind of like, oh, he's going on a European vacation, he's not going to really attract anything. But the tone around his trips, at least the conversation, is different. He expects to bring results. He's promising them. It was announced this week in Clark County that $1 billion Chinese firm is going to reopen a paper mill and begin construction on that.
With some concessions from the state.
Right. That's certainly true, but that'll open 2018. So these projects, when he's going, even if he gets results, it's maybe a long-term payout before anything actually gets built sometimes.
Well, I think the papers are reporting it costs about $80,000 for his whole entourage to go, and then something like $45,000 through their efforts have come to the state. 45,000 jobs, I mean.
Right. Even as Mr. Hutchinson is going abroad, trying to bring new capital in, at mid-morning Friday, as we're taping this broadcast, we still don't know the specifics of what President Trump will announce today in Miami regarding the Obama administration's initiatives to restore diplomatic and commercial ties with Cuba. Now, we have Arkansas farmers with tons of commodities, rice, wheat, and protein that they want to sell to Cuba. And Mr. Trump is apparently taking a somewhat jaundiced eye on the entire arrangement.
Right, yeah, I'd say we don't know the details yet but at the time of taping, but going into it, I would say that I've talked to a few people, the general mood among Arkansas congressmen, Rick Crawford in the 1st District, the Delta, especially important to him, Arkansas Farm Bureau as well, is apprehension. They seem pretty nervous about this. I've never heard Rick Crawford say credit President Obama for opening up Cuba for agriculture, but the direction of it, they didn't seem like they liked it. A lot of this seems to be about travel restrictions and banking and not necessarily trading commodities so much. We don't know exactly, but anything that's going to make it harder to trade with Cuba in the future is the opposite of what Arkansas's agricultural industry wants to do.
Well, I got this morning at my request from the Arkansas Farm Bureau. It is safe to say we believe strongly in expanding opportunities for Arkansas ag products to be sold in Cuba. Any rollback in those opportunities would be disappointing. Part of the problem with selling to ag product or anything to Cuba is that under present restrictions, still letters of credit are not allowed. It has to be a cash basis, Hal.
Yes,
which greatly restricts Arkansas export.
Yes, and again, there's clearly a tension here within the Republican Party in the farm states where Republicans have been very strong. This opening up Cuba initiative has enormous grassroots appeal. And yet, for ideological reasons, and in Florida specifically, among the older elements of the Cuban community, there is a strident opposition to it. And again, we don't know for sure what's going to happen today, but the signs indicate that President Trump's going to come down on the side of rolling back those advances, and that's going to create some tension, again, within his Republican Party constituencies.
And indeed within the Arkansas delegation, where we have the gentleman, one of whom is Senator Cotton, stands alone, methinks, unless he's changed his position in the last 24, Mr. Cotton's still opposed to a normalization and wants, in fact, I think, even sterner standards or impositions against Cuba, while his colleague, Mr. Bozeman, and the gentleman who sits for the first district, Mr. Craw, only this past week, the two of them authored an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal saying, please, let's get these products down to Cuba.
And that suggests, again, the tension between the ideological orientation rooted in historical anti-communism, anti-authoritarian government approaches, and the economic development emphasis that will benefit Arkansans from improved ties with Cuba.
It's certainly telling that the speech President Trump is giving is in Florida and not in the middle of a cornfield or something like that in Arkansas. That's where his attention's supposed to be, about the Cuban population, those sorts of issues. He's not drawing attention, of course, to the economic gains that Arkansans would get.
President Trump is expected to focus on human rights issues in talking about fair elections, which ironically, perhaps, given the moment, and the investigations ongoing, and also about the release of political prisoners. And he has met with the president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, who is involved in putting people to death for drug deals. So critics point out this, range of principled approach to human rights issues on the Trump administration's part, but this is going to be probably a part of his argument about Cuba.
Well, speaking of overseas travel, he's freshly back from Saudi Arabia, where he took tea with the monarchs there, who don't have a sterling record on human rights. Anyway, on to the Mr. Cotton. Credit him always for marching to his own drummer, and he once again this past week, Hal, has stood up for the Trump administration, and this is in the matter with General Sessions.
Sure, there are a number of investigations going on with regard to Russian involvement, interference in the campaign, and the possibility of some collusion with, domestic elements in these foreign interventions. There are a series of investigative reporters and reports coming out. There is an executive branch prosecution going on under a special, or investigation going on under a special prosecutor, and then there are congressional investigations. And it was in the context of a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing where Attorney General Sessions had volunteered to testify, that some pretty heated questions were coming Attorney General Sessions' way from the Democrats on the committee, and Senator Cotton emerged as, I think, arguably Sessions' strongest defender here in terms of trying to shift the focus away from concerns about what Sessions may have done, who he may have met with, and what they may have talked about, onto an alternative issue, and that is the leaks that are coming out of the government about, and through these investigative reports here. And again, he got quite a bit of recognition for taking this, again, strong position, and it raises the question, what's the long game that Senator Cotton is trying to play here? It would appear that he is casting his lot with President Trump and the Trump voters. And the interesting thing is, at a time when at least national polls suggest that Trump base is at best holding and arguably shrinking, but certainly not advancing.
Well, he stands alone, if I may observe. The other 5 members of the Arkansas delegation in D.C. have been remarkably, or maybe not so remarkably circumspect about it. They have essentially kept mum. Mr. Cotton continues to...
Yeah, I would say the rest of the delegation probably feels pretty fortunate that they're not in the seat that Senator Cotton is in. Perhaps they could obviously chime in whenever they wanted about what's going on with this. They were fine with commenting on investigations of Hillary Clinton that were being done by Congress and others. But this, they don't want to talk about a lot. Senator Cotton, the other big thing he got, one of his big lines that people repeated was, it wasn't even really a question. He asked Attorney General Sessions, have you seen anything more ridiculous than this, perhaps only in a spy novel? So that's the kind of questioning that Senator Cotton is generating for Attorney General Jeff Sessions. One of the reasons he came to testify is because he originally denied to investigators that he had met with members of the Russian government before, when it turns out that he did. So that's one of the reasons why he was asked to testify.
Finally tonight there was the awful shooting in Washington, D.C. Few would argue, I think, that the motivation self-described by the individual involved was supposedly political, but plainly this is insanity at work here. But it does illuminate, as many others have pointed out, the declining nature of the coarsening of American public life, political life. Hal, what to do about it?
Sure. Again, as we said earlier, diagnosing the problem is much easier than prescribing the solution here. What we're talking about is a long train of political violence in our American culture that certainly appears to be on the upsurge right now. And we can point to a number of forces and factors that are involved in it. One is obviously the very controversial issue of gun control. One is the clear appeal of negative campaigning in the current political environment. There's media developments associated with emerging social media norms where you say outrageous things behind the facade of a screen name. There's the rise of the niche media and a partisan media. But I think fundamentally, we're increasingly dividing ourselves as a country, whether you call it polarization, whether you call it sorting. We hang out with folks like us, and we have very little to do with folks who aren't like us, whoever we are here. And the bottom line is that's not the way we've historically done it to this extent in this country, and it fundamentally undermines our capacity to find common ground, our capacity to find accommodations and compromises that are satisfactory without being perfect. And that was our genius as a country and as a culture, and we certainly appear in danger of losing it. Now, the question is, how do we rise above this moment? And it was President Trump's observation that maybe it'll take something as tragic as the shooting of a sitting member of Congress to get us to step back from from the brink here. But we've got to figure out a way to lower the voices, and we've got to figure out a way to make compromise a good word as opposed to a bad word in our culture.
Got to end it there because we're out of time. Thanks to all for coming in. Once again, thanks to you for watching. As always, we'll see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.